First, thanks for meeting today. Maybe we'll just get started in how the co-op began.
Okay, well, in the late 60s, early 70s, the food co-op movement, the new wave food co-op movement, that's what it was called, because the old wave was in like the 1930s. So these little co-ops started all over the country. Actually, they were called food conspiracies. There's some context to that. You know, there was some political trials back then where people on the left were accused of being in a conspiracy against the government.
Was this like a communism, anti-communism?
Yeah, so like the Chicago 8, I think it was, the trial that came out of the protests of the 1960s during the Democratic Convention around the Vietnam War, the National Presidential Convention of the Democrats. And so I wasn't there in Chicago protesting, but there were people who were. And so I think that might have been the context of why they were called food conspiracies. But anyway, our co-op was called a food co-op. We started in 1973, and there were hundreds and hundreds, maybe 1,000 co-ops in the United States at that time. Many of them very small. Some of them were called buying clubs, but many of them grew out of the buying club thing and became food co-ops. Anyway, so the reason all these young people were starting food co-ops, and it was primarily very young people starting food co-ops, and what I mean by very young is in their 20s, early 20s. The reason people were doing it, I believe, was because there was a lot of distrust of systems in the United States. So there was a lot of distrust of frankly, our government, because for conducting this war in Vietnam, which to a certain segment of the young population seemed extremely unjust. And then there was, of course, great knowledge of the civil rights movement, which pointed out the racial injustice, and there was. And then the women's movement began, and the gay liberation movement began. Women's liberation, gay liberation. The first Earth Day was in 1970. The Diet for a Small Planet, a very influential book, came out, I can't remember, 69 or 70, explaining that if you eat meat, you're going to get a lot more pesticides, and that you should try and eat lower on the food chain as much as you can.
So basically, the co-op started out of all these different movements involved with social consciousness.
Exactly. All these movements from anti-Vietnam War, anti-imperialism. There was a lot of studying going on about when the United States invaded the Dominican Republic, for example. Etc. So us young people became students of invasions of all the different Latin American countries that got invaded over the last 150 years. So, or whatever, 110 years, I don't know. I don't have the exact.
So it was anti-colonialist,
Yeah. So there was. So once you distrust one thing, you look around to say, well, what do I trust? And we didn't trust the food supply. And some of us understood that we wanted to change our eating habits. And so we tried to change our eating habits, and now I'm really talking specifically 1972 here in Brooklyn, trying to change our eating habits, young people not making much money, trying to afford that change in eating habits. And the change in eating habits directed us to eat more expensive things. If you're going to eat chicken that was raised properly. Well, that was way more expensive. The co-op didn't have chicken at the time, but for those of my friends who did eat chicken, let's say, they found a source, that was way more expensive than chicken in the supermarket, let's say.
Initially, the co-op didn't have meat, though, right?
No, we didn't have meat until we started with poultry in the early 90s, and then we added, 10 years later, we added other kinds of meats.
Alcohol as well, right?
Alcohol, we started... I can't remember. I think the first license was 2002, our first grocery store beer license, which is the most you can have as a grocery store. Yeah.
So, but initially it was really about food equality.
It was about trying to eat a healthy diet, and trying to afford it. So the co-op didn't start as a do-gooder thing. In other words, we, the founders and the founders' friends and the community, wanted to help ourselves. But we also, at the same time, had a very, communal approach to life, and thought that America was too much about striving for your own success. Not that we didn't believe that your own success was important. We thought that was important, but we also believed in community success. So this was an opportunity to try to build a community institution and welcome everybody to join. Every single person on earth, we thought, should join our co-op. Of course, that was impractical if you lived 4,000 miles away. But whatever, we just thought that was that's who we were for. We were for building a community-controlled institution here in Brooklyn that welcomed everybody, and that would have the practical effect of lowering the cost of good food for those people who were members. And that's why we started, right? That was your question. Why did we start?
Right.
That's
Yes.
why we started.
Yes.
For those reasons, to practice a less individualistic approach, a more community approach to life, wherever possible.
And the co-op has really retained that, in my view. It's really maintained. What do you attribute the continued success of the co-op to? It seems like you've managed to keep those values.
We've been able to attract a membership who, whether they care about the co-op on day one or not, although some people do, many people do, some people pick up on the culture and the ethos of the co-op. Many people do. And so that even if you join saying, my doctor told me I better eat better or I'll be in trouble, and I can't afford it, so I'll join the co-op. But that person is just, it's all about them, which is fine. That's a great reason to join the co-op. But if you interviewed that person 5 years after they were a member, and you interviewed another person 5 years after they were a member, but the second person knew that they loved the co-op the day before they joined. They knew it was the kind of institution they wanted, which is different than the other person who was joining for very practical reasons. I believe that by and large you couldn't tell the difference between those people 5 years on if they joined the same day, because it kind of gets into your heart and under your skin and into your brain, and it becomes part of your life. And so that's what I think.
That's beautiful. Well, you tap into the collective consciousness, right?
Yeah.
On a certain level.
Yes. Well, you see, what one of the things I like to say to people is the co-op tapped into this idea that human beings are social, and that they construct from society to society all across the world. We make institutions, we make ways of relating to each other that are meaningful in our lives. Sometimes that's a religion. Sometimes it's being active in the life of your town or your community. It's just, we're looking for ways of coming together and being together and having community success. And I think that the co-op tapped into that, so that's the secret, I think, of why the co-op works. Because we're saying, we trust you to do your share, but please do your share, because if you don't, the co-op is going to fail.
Absolutely. I think that speaks to sort of like the reputation the co-op has for being, I don't want to say militant, but being unbending with the rules, and there's good reasons for those, it seems. Yeah,
I was once asked on a radio show by a host that invited me to be on his radio show, and I was asked why why does the co-op get called names sometimes like Nazi or something like that? I can't remember exactly his words. I think he used the word Nazi. And I said, well, it's a matter of protecting our base. We have all these members who have busy lives and yet somehow make time to keep up with their co-op work requirement. And then we have some people who have busy lives who say, my life is too busy to really keep up with my co-op work requirement. And then if we were to not enforce our requirement, if we would not enforce our work requirement, then what would the conclusion be of those people who have busy lives and do keep up? They would say, what am I, chopped liver? It's like, my life is important. Maybe I should skip my time at the co-op too, since the co-op doesn't do anything about it. So the co-op had to do something about it.
So it basically would fall apart if it didn't have this structure. And the structure
so if you ask me, I'm not saying you should, but if you ask me what was the most important day of the co-op in the history of the co-op, I would say, well, that was probably November, December 1974. Because that day, that season, that fall, we established our third work system, and it was the best work system we ever had. And we invented the system where every member worked every 4 weeks, and everybody at that time had to be on a group that we decided to call squads, and that those people would work every 4 weeks again and again and again, and that they would that hopefully those squads would get to know each other, like each other, feel good about each other, and feel a commitment to show up, because they knew the people that would be there without them, trying to make the co-op run without them, and that there would be some social glue added to the equation, not just a social glue of being committed to the co-op overall, but being committed to your small group called a squad. All right, and we decided that for the first time, we would put teeth behind our requirement. We had a requirement the year before that said, you must work every month. But no one ever thought of enforcing that. So there were people who essentially didn't work the whole year and could still shop. And so then we came up with a system of keeping track and saying to someone when they got here, it's not as friendly as it is now. You could look up on the computer and find out if you can't shop. But then you come to the door. So the first person came to the door who wasn't going to be allowed to shop, and they said, I'm here to shop. And the person at the door, from a special committee, then called the Records Committee, said, no, you can't shop. Why can't I shop? I have $100 that I'm going to spend at the co-op today. Well, money, we're not talking about money. We're talking about keeping up with cooperation. So you didn't keep up. You should do some makeups, figure out how to make up some time, and then you'll be allowed to shop. But no, you can't shop. So think about that. Think about who started the co-op. Okay, we described all those different movements, but there was another movement. They were called hippies, live and let live, flower children, things like that. Well, telling someone they can't shop is not flower children-like. Okay.
So from that day forward, they were susceptible to having a reputation of
right. So from that day forward,
being hard-nosed.
Right, and I was called around that time, or within the next year and a half or so, was the first time I was called a Nazi. Now, I could say there wasn't 100 more times, but no, I don't remember ever being called a Nazi again. But still, I was called a Nazi that first, and hopefully, I think it was the last time, because of this system of saying to someone, no, you can't shop. So but we had to stand up for the idea that everybody has to do a basic minimum, and have to do a basic minimum includes a command. You must do it if you want to keep up with your membership. And if you don't, that's fine. Maybe the co-op isn't for you. But we need to protect our co-op strength internally by having systems that protect those who are really doing it, which is the vast majority. And it's not like you're a bad person. if you can't keep up. It's not you're a bad person if you live across the street and don't join. It's fine. You could be the world's best citizen. But if you decide to be a member of the co-op, you have to take it seriously enough to do your share.
How many members are there now?
Right now, there's 16,000 members. Before the pandemic, we had hit like 17,000 or 17,100. And we're slowly coming out of the pandemic. And I expect we'll be adding to the 16,000. And someone listening to this might say, well, what do you mean? You could just add people willy-nilly? And the answer is no. But it would not be overconfident for me to say, yes, of course we could add more people. Because for since around 2008 or 9, or maybe it was 2007, we've had more interest in people joining the co-op than we have space for people. So it's been difficult to join the co-op for the last approximately 15 to 17 years.
So how did COVID affect the co-op besides a general decline in membership, or a small decline in membership, I should say?
Well, there was a big financial impact, and it's a weird thing because we wound up with more money at the end of COVID. Not that I exactly know when COVID ended, okay, but we wound up with more money at the end than we had in the beginning. Yet, during that time, we were losing at one point $125,000 a week. And
because of having to pay
because
employees.
Of sales volume went way down. People moved out of New York. We lost thousands of members. We didn't let anybody join for quite some time. I'm trying to remember the exact time. I think it might have been, it might not have been until December 2022 that we actually let people rejoin, by people in the community who weren't members to join. Right. And by that time, we had lost over 5,000 members.
I see. And then also, there was no member labor at that time, right?
Right. So we hired an extra 130 people to add to our 75 staff. And so we had like 205 employees or something.
I see.
And that was very costly. But as much as that cost, which was a lot, the lack of shopping, we reduced the hours drastically. We reduced the number of checkouts. We were famous from the beginning of COVID. We were famous for waiting online. And
I recall the lines.
And then when the lines went away, we were still famous for people waiting online outside. And that actually didn't last all that long. But we became famous for that. There were dedicated members of the co-op who didn't come for 3 or 4 years, you know. And so, you know, the thing is that the co-op, remember that person with the $100 who wanted to shop? Well, the fact is that person was partially right in that we actually do need people to shop. We just need to lead with cooperation. But if you have cooperation and those cooperators don't shop, well, the cooperative corporation law of New York State, it's not a not-for-profit law. It's a business corporation law. The main law is the business corporation law of New York State. The cooperative corporation law, and it's very thick, right? The cooperative corporation law is very skinny, and it says, when you can't find the answer in this law, look where? Look to the business corporation law. So the co-op is a business, and like any business, you must be financially sustainable or you cease to exist. And so we could have operations could have stopped because we were losing so much money.
I'm glad it didn't. And what do you attribute the general success of the co-op? Is it the spirit of community, of cooperation? Is it the neighbor? It almost seems like it's a Goldilocks zone. It doesn't seem like there's too many places.
I think there are many different aspects of why we were successful. One of which is we realized at one point that we had to do hiring. That we had to hire our first person, that this third member labor system that was the best we ever had, the co-op was still going to fall apart, and that we needed staff. We needed a staff person. So I was that first
staff person.
Yeah, I got hired I started, I think, something like June 5th, 1975.
What was your role back then?
Well, we decided deliberately not to call me the general manager back then. I basically operated like a general manager for all those years, but first I was the first person. I was the first general coordinator. Then we added, we made it 2 in 1979, and then we got up to 3 or 4 in the early 80s, first 4, then 3, then slowly up to 5, 6, 7 by the end of 1989. Then by the end of the 1980s, and then we realized, as we were adding a second building, we needed to start having different job titles.
So the building that we're in right now was formerly, it was just half this size, right?
The building we happen to be sitting in right now, there's 3 buildings. We're sitting in the middle building, which is the original. And in fact, the co-op started up a flight of stairs, and we didn't have access to the whole building. And then after a while, that's a whole nother story. I don't know if you want to get into
I'm curious about the neighborhood, how it changed and how you were able to acquire the buildings, and what the neighborhood was like in 1970 versus now.
Well, it's so interesting. About a year and a half ago, maybe, a young person in the co-op said to me, there's something I can't understand about the co-op. Why in the world did you start the co-op in such a bourgeois neighborhood? And so I didn't laugh. I gave a straight answer, which was, back in the day when me and my friends rented an apartment, we got a fantastic apartment for $275. It was a cheap apartment. And why was it so cheap? Well, one reason it was so cheap is because there were communities of people who were fleeing from here, because the perception, and it wasn't a completely wrong perception at all, was that it was a high crime area. And that you had to look behind you when you went up the stairs to the building where you were in before you put your key in the lock, because you didn't want someone to be following you and mugging you. It's like that was a reality at the time.
I feel like anywhere in New York in the 70s was kind of like that, right?
I guess so.
But especially Brooklyn, or more so in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. I was just in Brooklyn, so I can't certify about the other boroughs. But
did you grow up in Brooklyn?
I did, but not in this neighborhood. I grew up in Sheepshead Bay. And I had a great block with great friends who were all part of the baby boom generation. And we had a great childhood on that block. Anyway, so my answer to that person was, well, it wasn't. But the fact is, it was 1978, and the co-op was still only upstairs, and and the person who lived downstairs, and he had sole access to the basement of this first 22-foot building that we eventually bought, and he had the whole ground floor, and the ground floor goes back 90 feet from the building
this is the
line.
Current shopping floor.
Yeah, and the current shopping floor, and the upstairs only goes back 60 feet, so it's much shorter, and so this guy named Warren was living downstairs, and Warren was moving out. And I went to the guy who owned the building, a progressive person who was getting quite old, and he owned a few properties in the neighborhood, including the home where he lived. And I said to Bob, so Warren's moving out, and I would like to lease the whole building, but I want to lease it with an option to buy at a fixed price. Can you do that? He said, yeah, I'm thinking of selling my properties someday, so why not now? I'll lease it to you with an option to buy at a fixed price. And
then you had the building. So
and then we instituted, as you know, the co-op is big on sweat equity, meaning work requirement, but we had never had a member-owner equity investment. You didn't have to put any money in. Just like now, when you join, you have to put in $100 in, unless you get income-based assistance, in which case you only have to put $10 in. But, all right, so people had to put in $100. So now it's 100, but it was 10. Our original member-owner equity investment, which we misnamed as a deposit, but eventually we woke up to the fact that deposit is something you do with somebody else, and a member-owner equity investment is something you do with something you own. So it took us a while to change it, but it was called deposit for a bunch of years. So we were getting close to 1,000 members, and we figured we would need a $10,000 down payment on the building. And so we tried to raise $10 per member, which we did. And so we had a $10,000 down payment.
I like
we bought the building for $50,000.
$50,000. Oh, that's amazing. And this was in mid-70s?
We signed the lease with an option to buy, and it was fall, I think it was probably October in 1978, and we had to then exercise that by October 1980. So that's when we exercised it. And the National Cooperative Bank had been approved by one vote in at least one of the houses of Congress. It got approved, but I think maybe in the House of Representatives, it might have been just by one vote. It was during the Carter administration. And so we applied for a loan from the National Cooperative Bank. I said to the person selling us the building, hey, we got approved for a loan from the National Cooperative Bank. He said, no. I'm going to hold the mortgage. I don't want the money. I wanted you to pay me over the next 12 years. So that's what we did.
Nice.
And we borrowed from him instead of from the bank.
That's great.
For the second building, we borrowed from the bank and the National Cooperative Bank. And the third building, we borrowed from the National Cooperative Bank. But that first building, we borrowed from the landlord.
I like that you specified the language, though, that it's an investment, not a deposit, because it sort of speaks to the system and how we're really entrenched in a certain kind of system. Call it maybe you can say late capitalist or whatever you want to call it, but it seems like this is an alternative.
Well, for sure, it's interesting that capitalism allows for cooperativism, but it does. It kind of, when you think about it, it'd be hard to ban it. It's a way of, and cooperatives are an important part of the country, although they're not recognized as such. If you buy a sun-kissed orange, you're buying something that was produced by a very big farmers cooperative. Mm-hmm. If you buy Land O'Lakes, any product, it's from a big farmers cooperative. And there are others. And so how could your local hardware store survive, and I'm sure some haven't survived, how could they survive the advent of Home Depot and Lowe's? Well, it's because most of them are in one of the hardware cooperatives. True Value is a hardware cooperative. So that store is individually owned. Key Food stores, ShopRite stores, those are each in their own cooperative. So it's a way. Now, do the workers in ShopRite think it's a cooperative? I doubt it. Do the people shopping there think it's a cooperative? No. But the owner of ShopRite, one ShopRite, isn't a cooperative with the other owners. Mm-hmm. Same with Key Food. Right. And the True Value hardware stores, they have market clout because they buy from many stores.
Right.
And so they could compete, with a Home Depot, and survive,
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different kinds of cooperative, farmers cooperatives, purchasing cooperative, which is I just described, Key Food et al. Are purchasing cooperatives. Ace Hardware is another one.
Speaking of purchasing, how has that happened? How has that sort of evolved, and how did that start? You found vendors, you found good sources.
We found vendors, and sometimes now vendors find us, and ask us if, try to pitch to us that we should buy from them. But the most important thing that's happened in recent years is that we joined a purchasing cooperative called National Cooperative Grocer. And I think we joined around 2015 or 2016. I could look it up around then. And this week I was just in Minnesota at the semi-annual meeting of the National Cooperative Grocers, which is 160 co-ops, I think, in 38 states. I think it was 37, but then the co-op in Fairbanks, Alaska joined, so now it's 38. And so we have a purchasing co-op, and we have a national contract with a big natural food supplier. Actually, we have 2 contracts now with 2 different ones.
So that makes it easier to source food.
Yeah, it makes it easier, and it gives us market clout. It makes us a virtual chain.
So basically, in combination with all these other co-ops, you can come to the grower or the supplier and get a better deal and so forth.
Yes.
I see. And how have there been more? Have there been more co-ops since 1970? Since this one started?
Well, let's put it. If you looked at just New York City, right? If you said, well, what is the impact of food co-ops in New York City? What is the impact? What is the financial impact? Let's say, if you just looked at what percentage of the food in New York City is purchased by food cooperatives, right? So it is way bigger now than then. But there must have been. I have a book by my desk. I think it's published in 81. It has maybe 30, 40, maybe even 50 food co-ops in this area that existed then. But the fact is, the growth of our co-op and the Flatbush Food Co-op, the amount of food purchased by food cooperatives now is a bigger percentage of the pie than anything in the 70s or 80s. So the food co-op movement has shrunk because I don't think I can name 5 co-ops.
But there's more members.
But because there's so many members here, in particular, our co-op is the biggest of them. And we are bigger, way bigger than the whole. If there were 50 co-ops in 1975 or 100, we are bigger than all of them put together by a multiple. I can't give you the multiple, but it's way bigger. Those co-ops were often open like on Tuesday. You pre-ordered, someone went to the market, they brought back the food. Maybe you got a delivery from a supplier that had a delivery route on Tuesday, but they were wonderful.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking of this as a kind of model. Have you seen other sort of examples of co-ops like this one? I recently saw the film Food Co-op by Tom Booth.
Okay, great. I'm glad you saw that. Really well, the answer is yes and no. And no for the United States.
Yeah.
A partial yes for Brooklyn in that we have sister co-ops that have used our model, like the Windsor Terrace Food Co-op and the Green Hill Food Co-op. Green Hill coming first, Windsor Terrace second, in terms of Green Hill's older, and those co-ops are there, and I don't think they're going anywhere. I think they're making it, but it's not, So I think they're financially solvent, but I'm not really privy to exactly how solvent, but I'm hoping they're very solvent. And of course, we're always there to help with advice. And we started a revolving loan fund, our co-op, that's deposited in a 501c3. It's a donor advised fund, and we're the donor, and we elect members to be on this committee called the Revolving Loan Committee. And we've made 2 loans to the Green Hill Co-op to help them. Not very big loans, like a $10,000 loan and a $12,000 loan. And because we felt like just giving advice about how to do things was not enough, that there isn't enough financial support out there for small co-ops who use our model. But outside of Brooklyn, New York, I don't know of another co-op that uses our system. But if I go to Europe, I know of about 10.
Is the one did they start the one in France?
Yeah, they did, and people started copying them.
That's
and
cool.
I think there's 4 or 5 in France, 2 in Spain, 1 in Portugal, 1 in Belgium, and 2 in Germany.
That's great.
That
use
use our model. Someday I want to visit all 10 of them.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Do a road trip.
That'd be great.
Yeah, and I have visited the one in Paris.
The one La Louve?
Yeah, La Louve. Yeah.
The ones that, so for people that don't know, it was started by the filmmaker, Tom Booth, who started,
Brian, Tom, and another guy named Brian, and they're actually Americans, and they live in France with their spouses and children, and helped start this co-op. And my understanding is that Tom was visiting a friend of his who I believe lived in Queens, and his friend brought him as a guest when he was visiting from France. And he said, "Oh, wow," more or less. That's not a direct quote. "Maybe we could do this in Paris." And he got in touch with us, and we Skyped. And when I say we, primarily myself and Ann Herpel, Skyped with either one or both Brian and Tom, and either me or Ann or both of us. We Skyped at noon on Wednesdays, which is 6 p.m. Paris time, for years, to help them get organized. Not just from a cooperative point of view, but from a business point of view. I remember talking about when the search for how to get fruits and vegetables, at a decent price in Paris, so that you'd have good prices when the co-op opened, and they would do some research and describe it to me, and I said, "No, keep looking. That's not right, and here's why. Here's why that." From a business point of view,
experience sourcing vegetables
that's wrong.
And
that's
so
wrong.
Forth.
And then they find maybe some other supplier of something else who was used to selling to individuals and didn't understand what it meant to have a wholesale price, and they wanted to charge them just a little less than they would charge individuals. And I would say, "No, that's not right. You have to get a real wholesale price, not a fake wholesale price."
Right. And there's I want to, before I forget, there's an emphasis on 500 miles to local, is that right?
Yeah, we decided to define local because New York City has such a large housing reach outside the city. The suburbs go on and on. It's not like, say, a city, like if you go to Philadelphia and you drive, I don't know, a half a mile radius outside the city, you're probably going to start finding farms. Or maybe it's 45 minutes. That's not true for New York.
You got to go a couple hours.
Yeah, right. And so we decided that if someone could pick the food, let's say on Thursday, and deliver to us Friday morning, then that's local.
Well, it's amazing. I think,
and so we decided that was 500 miles, I guess.
Yeah, I see.
And so that's how we figured that out.
That seems to be a really key sort of ingredient in the co-op success. I wish we have to talk about the produce a little bit, about how good. I mean, I was struck when I first joined about how the quality of the produce is unbeatable. You can't. I mean, it's just everything's so fresh.
Well, there's two factors. We actually stress quality as a buying protocol, but also it's attributable to the members who keep shopping every week. So it's like we know how much to buy, generally speaking, because we know our membership is stable and steady. Yeah. We're not worrying that. I remember when I was going to the Hunts Point Market myself to get food for the co-op every week. I did that for about 10 years, from like 75 till maybe 85 or 86. I can't remember exactly which year I stopped, but it was right around then. And I remember coming back with blueberries, New Jersey blueberries, and our blueberries were great, but so were everybody had Jersey blueberries, and maybe ours were just as good as the others, not necessarily better, but I was saying, gee, and then I look at the supermarket at Carroll and 7th, which then might not have been a Key Food, it might have been a Bohack, which is a chain that went out of business. And they have a big sign, and the blueberries, because they were on sale, were 10 cents lower than our blueberries, which was our everyday price, right? Or 15 cents lower per container. And I said, I bought so many blueberries at the market. I wonder if we'll sell them. No problem. We sold them, of course, because people walk right past that supermarket. So I'm going to co-op and I'm going to buy blueberries there. And I found that interesting, and it was instructive. But not to say that we don't pay attention to price. We do, but but I think members are very committed once you do your work.
Right.
You're kind of...
You feel like you've worked for it.
Yeah, you work for it. And But the thing is, the co-op, I remember a woman said to me when she joined maybe around 1980 or something, and she said to me years later, she said to me, well, Joe, I have to tell you, when I joined, I would buy broccoli at the co-op and I'd forget about it. And 8 days later, I would open up my refrigerator and see the broccoli there and say, oh my God, it's still good. It's still like the day I bought it. But she remembered distinctly when she bought broccoli from the supermarket and forgot about it, that in just a few days, it was turning yellow.
Or if you shopped at Rawson's Farms, that you have to eat it like the day of or the next day because all that stuff was about ready to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it really does. It's the quality. So people wasn't just the prices. So people trust the quality.
It's having a good inventory control system, a good history of sales, and how to order based on that history. And so we didn't just order from the seat of our pants. From the very beginning, we ordered based on numbers, like scientifically, mathematically. We ordered food based on numerical knowledge of past sales. And we became real students of having a good inventory ordering system. And because of our wonderful member labor system, we took a full inventory of everything in the store, not just produce, every Sunday for years. And we didn't stop that until we put in the late 90s, we put in our first point of sale scanning system. And that eventually let us stop counting everything every week. Now we only count part of the store every week, and then another part the next week, and another part the next week. And some things get counted every week because there are inaccuracies, but some things don't get counted that often.
I imagine there was much less food waste than the average supermarket as a result.
Yes. Well, we, food waste is part of this supermarket term called shrink. Shrink is, if let's say, just a simple mathematical example, if you buy $10,000 worth of food and you, let's say, try to sell it for $11,000 and you sell all the food and it's all gone and you only have $10,500 when you count the money, but all the food's gone and you priced it all to sell at $11,000. Well, that missing $500 is called shrink. And that's a very big shrink.
Where's that going?
Well, it could be that some food spilled on the floor and you had to throw it out. It could be someone stole it. It could be that the food you thought you had to sell wasn't a $10,000 worth. It could be that you got charged $10,000, but maybe you signed certain delivery slips, invoices that week to say that you received delivery, but maybe you were cheated. Maybe it was not on purpose. Maybe it was on purpose. But maybe you signed for 10 cases of something, but you got 8. Because for whatever reason, a miscount could happen. So there could be spoilage. There could be mistakes.
So you say basically there's always going to be some...
Yeah, so our shrink, according to the financial statement, the most recent financial statement, is about 1.25%. Our overall loss of things that the money that should be there isn't there is about 1.25% of our sales, and yet the industry average is about double that.
Amazing. And I assume with things like our carbon, like the carbon footprint here, it must be much less than the average store as well.
Well, one of the reasons our carbon, we had a member who was high up in the what do you call that? That certifies a building to be environmentally.
The EPA?
No, there's a plaque on the front of the building. I'm trying to remember. When you buy an appliance like a refrigerator, there's something they call. I'm trying to remember the term right now. I can't remember. But we got the 2008 plaque on our outside of our building near the cart storage on the brick wall. And the reason we got that is we do some really good things
like
with our
climate pledge.
Yeah, with our air conditioning. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Energy has the word energy in it. Anyway, we got that award for that year. I'm sure other people did too, but because we were very efficient. Now, one of the reasons we're very efficient is probably the biggest reason of all is they look at all the activity that's happening here, all the food that's being purchased. Now, you could have the biggest footprint of a supermarket comes from its refrigeration and air conditioning systems. And you could take the same amount of air conditioning and refrigeration, and you could sell 1/10 the food. We sell so much more per square foot, so that we're really efficient, because for all the fossil fuels we burn, the amount we burn per pound of food supplied to people to eat is way less than the
And just to keep the space running as well, because it's so much smaller.
Right.
Is that true that it's the most the busiest supermarket per square foot in the country?
Well, I'm not sure, because I can't be sure, and maybe Zabar's is.
I'm sure it's up there.
But it's extremely efficient.
Certainly.
Yeah, it's something like it's about $10,000 per square foot of selling space per year. So if you go 6,000 square feet of selling space times 10,000, so that's let me see, that's
60,000.
so that's 4 zeros from the 10,000 and 3 zeros from so that's
600,000.
60 million. 60 million. We're gonna do close to $60 million of business this year, in terms of dollars of sales.
Yeah.
It's going to go over 59 million for this fiscal year.
Amazing.
Okay, so 60 million has 7 zeros, so 4 zeros and 3 zeros from those two numbers, right?
I trust your math much more than mine.
And then you get the 6 in front of the 7 zeros, and that's 60 million. And so we're $10,000 per square foot per year. One of the industry supermarket standards is something like, they often measure it by the week, but it's like, say, $600 per week times, say, 50 weeks is way less. It's like, I don't know, 3,000 per year. It's something like $3,000 per square foot per year. So it's a multiple of the national average. I think it's even better than what I'm saying. I think it's often 10 times the national average or something like that.
Do you think it's possible that it could catch on more in the country, that you could see this more as a model going forward?
I don't know.
Do you have hopes for that?
What happened was the food co-op movement, when we started, going back to the beginning, when we started, there were we believed that cooperation meant working together. And that was common among the food co-ops in the late 60s, early 70s. But by the time that we had started, unbeknownst to us, the food co-op movement in other cities was moving away from that, because to stand up to people and say you can't shop because you didn't do your share, that's a really big deal. Like I said, that was the most important day in the life of the co-op, that we were willing to stand up to someone who hadn't done their share and say, go home, go away, you're not going to shop. And as people were experimenting with member labor systems across the country, and members were not showing up, and so they started hiring staff, probably well before we were. Co-ops that were a little older than us, or starting the same time, they started with staff, and the culture became much more staff-centric and much more that member labor doesn't work, and that and also we started our co-op because we wanted to save money on food, but we also could still get the food even if the co-op failed. There was a health food store that preceded the food co-op in the neighborhood. And we're in New York City. We could go down to Sahadi's and get grains. We could go to a place called Pete's Spice in Manhattan where they had big barrels of beans and brown rice. I don't know when that store went out of business. So, so we had access to food. So the reason to start this co-op was not access to good food. But if you were in some other town in America, you might have needed the co-op just to have access to the good food, you see. And so if you start the co-op, the main reason to have it is to have access, where our main reason was affordability.
But there's also a social component, which I find very compelling. You talked about this in the documentary a little bit, and a little just now, that we're social beings, and you've created a culture. The co-op is really it's really a culture in which people enjoy being a part of it. They enjoy the social aspect. They enjoy. I know, but pre-COVID, it was they felt a sort of a kind of loyalty to their squad, their working squad, and now I think they just enjoy the social being a part of something. And we need to eat. We need good food, and it really taps into these fundamental things about what it is about being human, really.
Yeah. So if you're asking me why aren't there more of our model, like when I go to the National Cooperative Grocers, the two little co-ops in Brooklyn near us are not members of that yet. I hope they join someday. In some ways, they've been too small to be allowed to join, but that National Cooperative Grocers is changing a little and welcoming smaller co-ops. I certainly hope so. I want that to happen. But we are the only one of the 160 co-ops that requires member labor. And only a few handfuls allow any member labor at all.
All across the country?
Yeah, across the country.
So this is basically
so the main model here in Brooklyn that's copied across the country is the Flatbush Food Co-op, which used to have, but doesn't have a member labor system anymore. And so if you go to Sacramento, I've heard there's a really great co-op there. You go to Austin, Texas.
But they're not mandatory member labor.
These are all sister co-ops of ours. And believe me, if I were to leave Brooklyn and move to Austin, Texas, or Sacramento, California, or Minneapolis, Minnesota, the first thing I would do is join the co-op. Because sometimes people in our co-op say, oh, that's not a real co-op. There are members, and I wish members would stop saying that, because those co-ops are great. They are an alternative to everything being controlled by mega corporations. They are community. They are democratic, community-owned organizations. They are true cooperatives. They really have member owners that really own them. But the fact that they don't include the sweat equity part that we require doesn't make them not co-ops. They're great. And like I said, if I move to one of those towns, I'm joining first day. And we should support all kinds of co-ops. But anyway, I don't know. Like. I can't say that I think our model is going to spread. I think our co-op, if our co-op decided to spread it, we could. But so far we haven't. In fact, there was a vote against proceeding on the path toward the possibility of a second location. Maybe that'll get restarted by members in the future. But for now, it's been laid aside.
It seems to be really just like almost a spiritual imperative of some. You know what I mean? Like it's saying that here's a system within a system, that here's an alternative to the current system. We see a lot of inequity, and we see a lot of issues, and here's a possibility. Here's how things could be.
Right.
And it works. I think.
Right. And yes.
I watched a documentary called A Brief History of the Future on PBS recently. It's amazing. It's really good. A 6-part series. And they talk, at the end of it, the host talks about the term protopia, which I think was coined by this guy, the founder of Wired magazine, if I'm not mistaken. But it talks about, so it's not a dystopia, obviously. We don't want that.
It's not utopia yet, right?
Right. Yeah, but a protopia is something that's getting incrementally, we're trying, it's getting incrementally better. Like we're working on it.
It's on the road to utopia.
Yes.
The protopia road.
Yeah, it's like we're just making things a little better. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's showing a possibility.
That's what is that saying? Was it Martin Luther King? The arc of
justice bends.
The arc of freedom bends, or the arc of
the universe bends
the
towards
arc of
justice.
The universe bends towards freedom.
Yes.
Or something.
Yes.
Something like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think, isn't it? The arc of the universe bends towards justice. Or justice, I think.
Yes. Yes, but anyway, the arc is going in the right direction.
That's the
right?
point. That's the point. That we're going that way.
I'm a protopian then.
It's beautiful. I love it. I love it. It's showing a glimpse of how things could be. And in fact, it seems to me that like what the co-op's doing is something that actually probably is necessary for just survival of if we want to continue living here, in the world as we are, we're going to have to like make some changes in consciousness. Yeah.
Well, I'm all for it. I've lived my life doing that.
Yeah.
But it's hard to predict that it's just like the arc of the food co-op movement was to say member labor doesn't work, it's inefficient, let's have best practices that includes no member labor, or let's go in the direction of no member labor. So many co-ops across the nation that had member labor that are as old as us or almost as old as us or sometimes older than us had member labor. But what's interesting is there are these, if you read stories about co-ops that have started, if you look up food co-ops that have started recently, I don't know if you would find anything, they'll usually a really wonderful story about some people in that community working for maybe 7 to 11 years until the co-op opened. On opening day, they'll have a ribbon cutting, and those people who worked on starting the co-op invariably did not get paid. What did they do? They were unpaid. They were volunteered their time. You could call it member labor. Or we don't use the word volunteer since we have a work requirement. That doesn't sound voluntary to me. It's not. So the question is, when that co-op opens, and they open without a work requirement, and they're hoping to serve the community, possibly an underserved community, and they're hoping that co-op will be a success. And some of them make it, some of them don't, after the ribbon cutting. But what got them there was community-spirited people who volunteered, who didn't get paid, who did unpaid member labor, essentially. It was planning labor, So on opening day, they start by hiring a staff. They hire checkout workers and people to stock the shelves and people to receive the deliveries, all that stuff, And what if the volume isn't there right away in that community? How's that co-op going to make it?
They have too much overhead.
They're committed to no member labor. Some of them have a false notion that it's definitely illegal to do member labor. By the way, there's a whole controversy around that, of which I have quite an opinion on that. But you see, so I think those co-ops that are trying to start and that do start and start from the position of member labor, I think they're actually putting themselves at risk, because member labor builds community spirit. It builds connection.
Absolutely.
I once gave a talk, I think it was the International Year of Cooperatives, and I was invited to go to a different state and talk It was actually Montana, but in Missoula. And I was invited, and there was a multi co-op audience, right? The food co-op that I went to see. There was a credit union there. There was a farmers co-op, whatever. And my message was, hey, what makes co-op strong? What makes co-op strong is if their members feel connected. And we're all from different kinds of co-ops here, but you should. If I'm left with one message I want to say to you is think of all the ways. Just keep thinking about ways to build a connection with yourself and the members or the community. Because if the member owners feel connected, your co-op is strong. So our member owners clearly felt connected when COVID started, and I put a thing out on our website that we were losing $100,000 or $125,000 a week, and that I didn't know what the future held, and that if you could increase voluntarily, the minimum requirement for the member owner equity investment was $100, but you were allowed to put in more if you wanted to. We got $800,000 in 3 months.
Amazing.
That's
amazing.
And why did that happen? Because members felt connected.
Yeah, 100%.
So the thing is, we've been successful at having a membership that on average is quite connected. I'm not saying every individual member feels the same connection. So from the ones who feel the most to the ones who feel the least, but I'm saying that our average connection that we've built here is outstanding. And so you want to build a strong co-op? Figure out the pathways for members to feel connected. So I was visiting a co-op. It was a National Cooperative Grocers event. It was before COVID. I believe it was in the spring, like April or something. It was in North Carolina. It was in Durham, North Carolina. The Durham Food Co-op, which, by the way, years after the prior co-op in Durham went out of business. The prior co-op was called I believe the name of that co-op, by the way, was the People's Intergalactic Food Conspiracy. Okay, that started in the early 70s. Yeah. But this was the new Durham Food Co-op, and the attendees of this meeting were invited to come, and there was this community dinner every Wednesday night or something, out in front of the co-op where they had picnic tables. They had a parking lot. Of course, we don't have a parking lot. We don't even know how to spell parking lot, but so
it's like the Wild West out there.
But they had this thing where there was a long line of 50 or 100 people paying $3 to get a basic meal, that they were serving every Wednesday night. And the attendance was fantastic. That's cool. Every picnic table was full.
So it's building community.
Yeah, it was building community.
Yeah, cool.
It was saying we're here for the community, and we understand that some people are struggling, and so we're going to make this really cheap. We're going to try and just break even on this dinner. We're going to pay staff to make the dinner, and. I can't remember. I think I had rice and beans.
That's cool.
Whatever,
that's cool.
And maybe a little salad or something. Yeah. But
But it's about building the community in a sense of connected. And I think that's the sort of piece here that from the outside it seems like people are like, why would you want to do that? You can just go to the store and pay. You can go to Costco over there. You can go to over here. It's
right. Right. So here's a co-op that didn't have member labor. Right, but it was they put it in a place.
It was still supported by the community.
They put it in a place that was supported by more than one community. Yeah. They had a racial diversity in their membership, which was great, in my opinion, and they were trying to build connection,
Absolutely.
and people would come with their kids, and it was a great
That's
scene.
Really cool. That's beautiful.
And I was saying, oh wow. They're building connection. This was a few years after I gave that speech about connection, and so if you want to have a strong co-op, figure out Be creative, figure out all the ways you can of having people feel connected. And so for us, it's a little easier since we force people to come and work, and while they're working, they might build a connection. Now, instead of every 4 weeks, we have people working 6 weeks. We've reduced the amount of people on recurring shifts. Like some people are on recurring shifts. It used to be almost everybody was on a recurring shift every 4 weeks. So there was some group identity. I described that earlier. But I think, by and large, the new member labor system is actually making our co-op stronger because we've made it easier to be a member. Now, what about connection? Do we have as strong a connection as we had pre-COVID? I think the jury is still out. But see, I think
that's up to you. It's up to the individual, right?
Right. So our members are. This is a new system. The old system started in late 1974. We tweaked it and improved it from then until when COVID started, until March of 2020, when we ended that system. So we just started this new system, I think, in July of 2021. And so we now just have to keep in mind what we're trying to do here and keep trying to figure out ways for members to be connected. And so I think our co-op is in good shape that way, but I'm a believer in not taking success for granted. It's my job and other people in my, in the top management and the management in general of the co-op, to not rest on your laurels. You know what I mean? To keep checking in on the sustainability and solvency, sustainability, future strength of the co-op.
Absolutely.
So that's how I do my job. That's how I look at it. To keep thinking of those things.
It shows in the results. That dynamic quality shows up in how that it's still successful. Your work. It's like you're shifting with the times. There's a certain, I think the way that I've been a member since 2017, and I've seen some of those shifts that you described in terms of just, I think COVID sort of like made the sort of the system where you had to sign in online. Before it was all done manually. You sign out at the end of your shift, and you had the recurring shifts. I think it's actually more in line with the culture now. So I think it makes a lot of sense.
Well, that's good news. You think that the 6-week thing?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It used to be you had to find someone to trade with on your if you couldn't come, and now you could just cancel. Now you could just cancel the night before.
It's great.
And
it's great. It's more reflects the culture.
Right. And in the old system, we used to have to keep explaining that the reason sometimes you'll get 2 makeups when you miss is because scheduled time is worth twice as much as unscheduled time. Now that's really true. That it really is worth twice as much. But now we give people the opportunity to unschedule their time.
And then somebody else just jumps in and takes that shift.
And someone jumps in. Yeah. So it was a brilliant, wasn't invented by me. It was invented by a couple of my colleagues.
It's good.
And it's a great system.
Absolutely.
And if I had to list, I had a sheet of paper with the pros and cons of the old system and the pros and cons of the new system. There'd be pros and cons on both sheets of paper. You know what I mean? So, but I'll go with the new system now. Don't have any choice, but we don't have a choice. We were married to it, but we're gonna just have to keep looking at that sheet of pros and cons and look at the cons and say, how do I eliminate any of them that I can?
It's like I see it now. Talking to you, I realize what a creative sort of project it is. Like I was listening to a podcast. I don't remember who they were. It was 2 comedians talking about comedy, and one was saying that once they know the joke is going to get a laugh, they can't. It's done. They can't do it anymore. And I think about that in terms of art. I make paintings, and when I know that painting is going to, like, from the idea to the actual execution, when I know it's going to work, then it's kind of over. It's not living anymore. So it's a living thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anything creative, and I see the co-op as this sort of creative project.
So does that thought process for your art go all the way until you're finished? with it? Do you keep that alive until it's actually finished, or do you lose interest before it's finished?
I usually finish it. I'm stubborn.
Okay.
I should stop, but I'll do 10 paintings.
So that's a great. I'm glad you brought that up, because from the time I got my job, I went home from work at the end of every week without having finished my job, and it's never been finished. And I've often thought of someone who's a baker and needs to bake 1,000 loaves of bread every night, and they actually could say at the end of the week, whenever that is, that they baked, maybe they work a 5-day week maybe, and they 1,000 loaves a night, whatever, and they bake their 5,000 loaves and they're done.
You don't have that. You can't do that.
I've never had that experience. It's never been finished. There's always been a list of things that were really important to accomplish that didn't get finished that week. Some of them might not get finished for 2 or 3 years.
And because there's a new thing.
Because there are improvements that you can see must be made.
It has to be done. Yeah.
I don't know what made me think of this, but I'll tell you another story that really helped inform my thought process at the co-op. Sometime in the 1970s, a co-op member came over to me and said, well, Joe, I'm leaving the co-op. I said, oh, we're going to really miss you. You're a great member. They said, well, yeah, I really love the co-op. I said, well, why are you moving? Why are you leaving? Are you moving away? They said, no, I'm staying right here. They said, but you see, even though I love the co-op has to make practical sense in my life. And the co-op is only open on Saturdays, which was true at that time.
Back in those days.
Yeah.
So it wasn't every day.
No, it was only open on Saturdays. And back then there were stores that were still closed on Sunday. That you really had to do your errands on Saturday. And this person had a family, and they had to do their errands, and the co-op had a limited breadth of food. There were a lot of things we didn't carry. We didn't have much space. And the person said to me, I got to do all these things on Saturdays. And I don't have time. Not only do I not have time for my work slot, my share of the work, but I don't have time to shop here, even when I don't have to work, because I have so many other things to do on Saturdays. And I need to go to a store that it's more of a one-stop shop. So it really resonated with me. I said, oh my God, here's a person who loves the co-op. I know they love the co-op, and they told me again that they love the co-op, yet they're quitting. I said, so what am I supposed to do about that? And so I said, well, I have to plan for this being more of a one-stop shop. So we don't have people who love the co-op quitting. I've got to take care of that. I've got to address that. We've got to address that, our co-op. So that really was early on in my employment career.
I like that you've been very flexible and you're seeing the opportunities here and seeing possibilities and questioning, what could happen and how it could be better all along the way.
Yeah. I like to be able to say, and I have said in the past, I like it that I could look back at the co-op at any moment in time and look back at, let's say, 2008 or 2002 or 1996 or whatever it is, you pick the year, and if I look back 3 years, perhaps 4, and I say, is the co-op better today than it was 3 or 4 years ago? And I like to be able to say I could always answer that question. For these last 49 years that I've been employed, 49, approaching 49 and a half, but who's counting? That I could say that was true, that the co-op is better now than it was 3 or 4 years ago, because there have been people who've been thinking about how to improve it, So I just want to say one thing about our governance, because one of the things that the co-op has let its staff do is take an entrepreneurial approach. Entrepreneurial, not anti-democratic, in that any major thing that we do, we need to get clearance from the membership. But
I'd say it's boring.
But micromanaging is not good, and there are co-ops that have micromanaged. Usually, their general manager. There are co-ops. The co-op movement is trying to not let that happen, and they have a system for doing that. But our governance system is different than most. But our system, our general meeting system, where the general coordinators have reported every month, going back forever, and frequent financial reporting and all that, have been, but it's allowed us to go to bat for the co-op with all our heart, all our brains, all our energy, kind of let us put everything we have into it. And so as member owners, collectively, the member owners have let the staff do that on behalf of the co-op. And so that has been a very important aspect of the co-op's success.
Absolutely. And that goes back to sort of the flexibility of you and for the other people that are sort of like foster. I know it's non-hierarchical, which that's another sort of amazing feature.
Well, there's a hierarchy for sure. I mean, there's a top management team. The general coordinators really are the top of that employment. The organizational chart of the employees.
Yeah.
Right,
well, there has to be some structure, right?
Yes,
otherwise
there is structure.
Members would come in, they wouldn't know what to do.
There is structure. There is
absolutely
a supervisory relationships. On the other 100%. Hand, everybody who works here, I consider a manager, because we're not hiring people in non-managerial roles. We don't hire people to stock the shelves.
Everybody that does, the members do that. And so the staff
we don't hire people to run the checkout lines.
Right.
We hire people, we do hire people to be part of the deliveries, which groceries are very heavy. And
to truck
so we need the members to share that weight, but also it's much more complicated putting the food away properly than it is putting it on the shelf or checking it out at the checkout. So, so we need a mixture of staff and members to work as a team together, with the staff being the leaders for any delivery.
It's a kind of an alchemy, right? There's like finding the right balance of all the components.
Yeah, and so we look at that and say how many staff do we really need? How many members do we really need? How do we aim the right amount of people with the right amount of skills at the right jobs? So.
Well,
yeah.
What one final question?
Yes.
What are your 3 favorite vegetables?
My 3 favorite vegetables. Okay, you don't want to know about my fruits. Okay.
Fruits and vegetables. It could be fruits too. Let's do three vegetables and 3 fruits.
Okay. Let me see. Right now, I think the season's ending, but one of my favorite fruits is the honeydew melons, the conventionally grown honeydew melons because remember, I went to the Hunts Point Market for 10 years, and I learned.
It's in Queens, right?
No, it's in the South Bronx, but I would struggle I'd bring back honeydews, and they wouldn't quite taste as good as they should, and sometimes I'd hit it right. And finally, I discovered a brand of honeydew that after a few years in the market, and it costs more, but it's the most consistently good honeydew, and that's the only kind of conventional honeydew the co-op buys. It's got a label on it, and if you look carefully in script across the label, it says sycamore. So if you see a sycamore honeydew,
I'll get one.
You should get one, even though
Are these seasonal?
But you might be a person who only buys organic, in which case it's conventionally grown.
Well, I mean, melons have a nice hard shell, so
yeah.
I think you're pretty safe
and
with stuff like that.
So let me see. Other fruits I love. We'll go to stay with fruits. I love the well, some of them are gone, like the Florida citrus industry has been devastated by various diseases. So I guess I'll avoid things that aren't available anymore.
Yeah.
So the California Valencia oranges that happen in the fall.
Are they coming in soon?
Yeah, I think they're here now, but the season used to go into December, and because of climate change. But anyway, they could be fantastic. They have a few seeds. A lot of people seeds, but some people confuse them with navels because they kind of look like navels, but they actually don't. And those are really good. I would say that a Hudson Valley apple, Hudson Valley apples.
Any particular variety?
Well, I mean, there's nothing like it doesn't last long, but the McIntosh and the McCowan, which is also called a McCoon, depending on who you talk to.
Do we have those now, or are those coming in? I
think McIntosh has started. Yeah. Yeah, and so I would say those fruits. Vegetables. Well, I really love cooking this dish that I make with pasta and Parmesan cheese and broccoli rabe, and so I recommend broccoli rabe. Yeah, and let me see. Other vegetables, I would have to say arugula is a favorite. I remember arugula became so popular in the co-op that I remember in the 1990s, I remember searching my brain and asking people what their opinion, what do you think the arugula of the 90s will be? That's because arugula was already popular in the 80s. Anyway, so arugula, broccoli rabe, and let me see. I really like asparagus. Yeah.
Same. It's interesting.
I really like asparagus, but I particularly am thrilled in late January, maybe February 1st or so, when the asparagus starts coming from North America. And I say, welcome back, North American asparagus. Because it first comes from Mexico, and then it makes its way up the coast of California, and then it starts in the east too, and
then early spring you get it, right?
Yeah, so then you get it from New Jersey and say, late April or something.
I feel like you're more in touch. I've been more in touch with seasonal vegetables, and even the seasons shopping in the co-op.
Yeah,
because you're more aware. You see certain things just aren't around at certain times of year.
Yeah, and the seasons are really changing. I mean, I learned a lot about the seasons, and I kind of have them embedded in my brain of different things, and it's starting to fail because of climate change. That's unfortunate.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
I've noticed that too. Even the past 10 years, it doesn't snow in New York anymore.
That's right.
It's weird.
That's right.
Weird. You don't get those blizzards like we used to have.
Yeah.
It doesn't get as cold.
Yeah, I could tell you stories about going to the Hunts Point Market right after a snowstorm. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. But because it doesn't snow that much anymore.
Yeah, it's a different climate.
Yeah.
Different place.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being today.
Well, really
thank
nice
you for your generosity
you.
And for all of your work here.
Well, you're welcome.
You created
thank you.
A protopia indeed.
Okay.
Thank you again.
You're welcome.
All right. Take care.